Hello my friends and welcome, my name is Dennis and this is the latest update from Ukraine. Let's start from the situation on the ground, and as you can see from the latest military map update, Ukraine has performed a successful counterattack in New York village. Yes, Ukraine took the ground from the Russian forces. Several of the quarters of New York, it's the small settlement, you may call it small town or the village, were liberated by Ukraine. So just yesterday Russia moved in this place, they took this ground, and it seems like Ukraine wants to strike the Russian army from the flanks. We know that Ukraine sent some of the reserves to New York and Torres, so now they are in use by Ukrainian army. But Russia has two other attack vectors, and one is towards Panteleimonovka village directly to the west, and the other one is the alternate way for Russia to advance to New York. Here they might try to go across the fields and attack the settlement from the west. According to the satellite images, here are the main Ukrainian defense lines, and in this area there are none of the defense lines, probably just trenches digged down by the soldiers themselves, and they're kind of weak against the artillery fire and also aviation gliding bombs. So Russia still has the way out in this operation in New York, but you can see that Ukraine still is able to get the ground, to gain the ground and repel the Russian attacks. Infantry forces of Ukraine performed this operation. None of the armored vehicles were used. Also, Ukraine has the success in Novaya-Horivka. It's the Luhansk Oblast, which is mostly occupied. However, still there are some of the villages which are under control by Ukraine, as well as some turf-filled areas. So here Ukraine also performed a counterattack, and we may see it from the Miko 73 military analytic. I always check his updates every day, and his data is usually correct because he analyzes all of the reports from Ukrainian and the Russian sides, as well as many of the drone images. And obviously the photos and videos which are coming from the active battleground. So here the Azov regiment went on a counterattack. There are two vectors of the counterattack. It means that Ukraine has some of the extra forces. We know that a couple of months ago the ban on Azov weaponry was lifted by the United States of America. So Azov started to obtain a better weaponry. And actually this is one of the most capable regiments out there in Ukraine, the 3rd Assault Brigade and Azov. And they even use some of the tanks, armored vehicles, plus artillery to strike the Russian positions, and definitely this attack on the northern part was successful. So far it's hard to tell about the Russian losses. What I know that Ukraine was able to capture one of the Russian tanks. It was the old T-62. My friends, as for the combat images, I usually share that stuff on my Telegram. You may find it just in the video description below. I'm unable to post those kind of the videos on this platform because it is getting so restrictive. So I have to blur and filter the vast part of the content that I would have showed you without those restrictions. Guess there are breaking news about probably one of the biggest exchange since the Cold War. But we started with the Frontlines review, so let's at first continue with this topic, and the rest of the news we're gonna discuss later in this video. Stand by with me. And here you may see that Russia tries to attack Ukrainian positions in the Chasiv Yar. Before they have occupied the eastern side of the city, but there is the river, and Ukraine built quite robust defense lines out there. It is a very smart move. So with all of their attacks, Russia is just unable to break through to the other shore. So here, if we check out the 3D map, this water obstacle actually holds the Russian army. Well, it's the military map of the Institute for the Study of War, and usually it's not that precise. The amber part here is the Russian claimed territory, which they claim they took under control. The actual border goes all across this river. Russia is unable to cross it for now. So what's the next move for the Russian army? Well, I guess they will advance over here. I told about it maybe even 3 or 4 months ago. They'll use this wood to go right to the city from the south. But for now, they do not have those attempts. They go straight forward. They want to go right in the city. And because of it, they have tremendous losses. Even far behind the actual front line, they lose many of the vehicles because of the Ukrainian FPV drone strikes. So Russia in this area is actually unsafe. And we may also see it on this military map. Well, Russia tried to go using this forest directly towards the city, but Ukraine used artillery or drones to repel the Russian army attack. And now probably the most vulnerable direction for Ukraine is Pokrovsk direction. If we zoom into this Russian breakthrough attack, so this is yesterday and it is today, you can see that every day they gain more and more ground. It means the defense of the Ukrainian army is not that robust in this area. But again, I told you about this line of Ukrainian defense between Mykolaiivka and Horodivka. So Ukraine uses those villages as the defense line. But as you can see, Russia is very close. They've took Veselo village today under control fully. Now they advance towards Serhiivka village and soon they're gonna reach this defense line very soon. Probably even this week. So everyday distance check from Pokrovsk to the actual front lines, 16.32 kilometers. Yesterday it was 17.32. Russians moved by 1 kilometer. Well, I'm not really precise in putting this point, so probably it's 16.5. So Russia is not really that far away from reaching the Pokrovsk city. As for me, I thought it would be impossible for Russia to move that far from Avdiivka. After Avdiivka was occupied, some of our military commanders say that Ukraine should prepare the defense of Pokrovsk, and by the time I told like the distance to Pokrovsk is around 38 kilometers, so it's really far away, but actually it's not that far already in the middle of the year. But Russia will never advance to the city using just a single attack vector. No, their tactics is to perform the two-vector attack like the clouds, trying to encircle the city, and also they use lots of the artillery to force Ukraine to leave positions. And for now, Russia uses artillery. They fire directly to Pokrovsk, but they didn't do it as usual, as it was in Bakhmut with this artillery fireball. Well, maybe they're just saving their artillery shells to use them in a close-by settlements at first. Here's what Micro Sense 3 shows us that definitely Russians took Veselo village. And they also create kind of the risky areas for Ukrainian army over here and here as well. So it's now understandable that the goal for the Russian army as minimum is to advance towards Pokrovsk and to occupy the city. They throw every source of the resource for this particular attack, and the secondary target for them is to go to Toretsk. But here, as you saw, Ukraine performed a successful counterattack recently. Guys, if you like the job that I do daily on my YouTube channel, you may also consider supporting me on Patreon. My Patreon page link is available in the video description just below. Thank you so much for your kind support and for your motivation. Also, Russia is very oriented to take Vuhledar under control. Recently, they started a massive attack trying to get closer to Vuhledar town, but that attack totally failed for the Russian army. By the way, it was one of the biggest attacks in that sector for a very long time. I'm monitoring the front lines updates and all of those drone videos, and I must say that there was a big gap between the massive Russian attacks. Almost entire summer they advanced with small portions of their infantry forces or small portions of their armored vehicles like 2, 3, 4. But now they again try to create big, huge convoys. I wonder why, because that tactics doesn't work for them. So for the era where they had and have success after Avdiivka, almost all the time that success was reached only because of the infantry forces. But here they go with bigger convoys and you understand what usually happens to them. The Vuhledar is located on the south of the Donetsk Oblast. Why is it important for Ukraine? Because it's the key settlement for Ukraine to reach the Russian supply line. This railroad is connecting Donetsk with Mariupol and so on. So Russia needs to secure this area, and they only may do it by moving Ukrainian army further from the place, and for this they need to take Vuhledar under control. And they need this road crucially because it helps them to send forces very fast from the Donetsk direction to the south and vice versa. For this reason they wasted already thousands of the forces and hundreds of the armored vehicles in their attempts to take Vuhledar under control for almost 2 years already. Before they had the attack attempts just from the south, but now they moved from the east, and actually here they took some of the ground recently. But anyways, we'll see how it goes. The defense of Vuhledar for Ukraine is very robust. I would say that maybe it's the most defended settlement out there in Ukraine. So guys, to the news about the exchange that happened today. I consider it as the awesome news, because people were released from the Russian custody, so Russia took the hostages actually to get their spies out from the United States and German prisons. And here you can see even the American journalist Ivan Greshkovich, the correspondent of the Wall Street Journal. He was arrested and imprisoned by Russia for espionage for 16 years. There is also former United States Marine Paul Whelan, who was also released from the Russian custody. Honestly, I didn't have the time to Google how he looks. Probably he is behind out there standing with American flag, I guess. So totally 24 people were released, and unfortunately Russia also obtained their spies and real killers. For example, Russia has obtained a former high-rank FSB colonel Vadim Krasikov, who was imprisoned in Germany. Krasikov was convinced of the murder of the former Chechen fighter Zenon Khan back in 2019. Basically, Krasikov just executed the order which was coming from Kremlin. The exchange happened in Ankara, and later on Russian spies and killers were delivered to Moscow, and Putin himself met his killer out there. But after all, I'm glad that it happened, because many of the United States and German citizens were released, as well as many Russian opposition leaders. Those who didn't afraid to speak the truth about the war. The opposition activist Yashin especially, he said truth about the Russian aggression. He understood that he will be jailed, but nevertheless he didn't hesitate to say other things, and he was indeed jailed. Luckily he is now freed, but at the same time, Russia obtained their FSB killers. And it might encourage the Russian intelligence to act more actively outside Russia, to do more crimes, because after all they know that Russia will get them out by exchanging them not for American spies, for example, but for American basketball players, journalists, or any other American or the Western citizens. So Russia may take any sort of the foreigner as the hostage for the further exchange. For this reason, I do not recommend you to visit Russia. But I think that the viewers of my channel do not have that intention. The Russian opposition leader Navalny didn't make it to this exchange, as Jake Sullivan said today on a briefing dedicated to this very unique event. And according to intelligence, definitely Navalny had some issues with his health. The blood clot was probably the real cause of his death, but why he had this medical condition? Because of the conditions in the Russian prison. So basically by this exchange, the United States of America and Germany saved lots of the lives of quite good people. More details about the exchange you may read in any sort of the media. I just share my own impression from my own perspective on this event. What an ugly face. Alright, well, I'm recording this video. There were some of the kabooms reported in Sevastopol city, my hometown, which is now being occupied by the Russian army. Yeah, definitely there was some sort of the kaboom. It's hard to say whether it's Russian defense really in operation, or it's the drone strike right into some sort of the military target. I'll see just tomorrow morning. Sorry for this watermark. I monitor the Russian groups and publics about this information which is coming. One more Russian oil depot was hit by Ukrainian drones. It happened in Omsk. Omsk is quite far away from Ukrainian border. But anyways, Ukraine has kind of the long-range drones, and they're capable to perform those tasks. The problem with the drones is that they may only precisely hit some certain area. They're not equipped with a cluster munition shells or something like that, like ATACMS, for example, to shrapnel the vast area like for example airfields. But something tells me that Ukraine is working on that too, and recently President Zelensky told to American partners that if you do not give us ATACMS permission to use those missiles against the Russian military airfields, we're gonna come out with our own solution. So the solution should be adequate or equal to ATACMS, and for that you need shrapnel, so cluster munition, lots of the shrapnel in airfield to hit many of the Russian jets. So probably, yes, I think that Ukraine is working on that tool. And here are the Ukrainian drones which Ukraine launches to target the Russian military or other type of the infrastructure, I mean the energy infrastructure, because all the ports are in this sector. The most popular is probably the Beaver drone, and it has kind of the clumsy main landing gear, but it doesn't really need it. It needs it just for takeoff, and later on I think it just drops it down to the ground, because the normal landing is not the option for Beaver after it takes off. The other popular drone is Mugun 5, but here they show it probably in relation to the size of the average man. I think Mugun 5 is really smaller. And recently Ukraine started to use jet drones. It's very hard to intercept those, but they're very limited in the range. And new Russian drones which they start to produce and send massively to Ukraine. As you can see, the drone is made out of the styrofoam or plastic foam, you may call it, plus carton, so it's very light and also transparent to the radar waves. Russians paint those in a black color because they send those usually during the night time. The drone is equipped with this piston engine with kind of the primitive carburetor. You may find those kind of the engines in internet basically for the remote control airplanes. Basically the air models we call them. And here's the micro scheme of the drone. I wonder if we may spot some letters. Actually it's hard to say where this micro scheme was produced, but maybe it is not the Russian made. You know, yesterday I showed you this photo saying that definitely Ukraine obtained F-16s, and we have the confirmation about it from the Western media sources, but Russian Z military bloggers say that it is probably a Photoshop. Well, honestly, yes, it is a Photoshop, and I'll just show you a real photo. Here we go, that is what happened in real. Ukraine just photoshopped the rest of the airplanes, leaving just a single one for Russians not to poo in their pants. Yeah, if you didn't understand, it's just a joke, but Russians do afraid of Ukrainian F-16s. Today, Peskov in his press conference said that F-16s will not cause lots of the troubles for the Russian aviation or the Russian military, but something tells me that he is wrong. F-16s really could eliminate or lower the threat from the Russian gliding bombs. Alright, what else Peskov said today? That Russia doesn't really want to participate in the Ukrainian peace initiative, which was initially supported by most of the countries during the meeting in Switzerland. And there should be a second meeting concerning this initiative, and probably it will take place somewhere outside Switzerland, maybe in some kind of the other country. But Russia is not interested in that, even though Ukraine said that they're okay if Russia participates in that event. It tells a lot about the real Russian interest in Ukraine. They basically want at first to secure their currently gained territories, and later on they want to occupy all of the Ukraine. That's their plan. There are lots of the talks about the peace recently, but something tells me that the war in Ukraine might continue for many more years. Basically while the Russian regime has its power in Russia, because the war is already ongoing for many years. This image is the situation on the front lines 10 years ago, on 1st of August 2014, and here Ukrainian army was really successful by the time, cutting and encircling the Russian forces, so Horlivka, Makivka, Donetsk, all of that was cut from the supplies from the Russian side. By the time there were occasionally Russian soldiers fighting in the area, and the Russian commanders like Strelkov commanded the local separatists. So in August, Russians saw that they're losing control over those areas, and they've decided to enter with their regular army. 10 years ago, guys. 10 years. After that, Ukraine lost territories and decided to sign Minsk agreements with Russia, the peace agreements which lasted for 8 years. And now Russia proposes Ukraine to sign one more Minsky kind of the agreements, which will just lead to the further escalation. Just a few weeks before Russia started a full-scale war in Ukraine, they got rid of Minsk agreements, saying that Ukraine is not following them. So they've decided to take Ukraine by power, but they failed with this task. The Ukrainian resistance was and is really hard. I'm telling this story just for you to understand that any sort of the peace agreements with current Russian regime are just not working. And it happened not just in Ukraine, but also in Ichkeria, so Chechnya. Then Putin just thrown away the agreements and attacked the republic. Putin is the guy who shouldn't be trusted by anyone. But unfortunately, someone in American politics, someone who wants to be a president, wants to have a deal with Putin. By the way, let's check out American politics for a moment, because there are some of the recent polls. So here's the situation on 21st of July. From what I remember, Biden versus Trump, but then Biden decided to drop off from the presidential race. Here's the current situation. Just 10 days after, and Harris is definitely more popular than Biden, as we can see. She even took some of the states, from what I can see, in her favor. So the difference is not that dramatic, so I guess it was the right move from Democrats to put Kamala Harris as the candidate for the presidency in this campaign. And it was absolutely the right decision from Joe Biden to drop off from the elections. But still, it's really hard to predict of who will be the winner of the future elections in the United States. We're gonna see it ourselves. And now, my friends, please don't forget to press your huge like to this video. By doing so, you help me a lot. And as usual, I wish you all a peaceful sky wherever you are, and have a great time.